I never thought a quiet December night in Cedar Rapids would become the moment that split my life into a before and an after, but when I look back now, every second of that night still presses against my ribs like a bruise that refuses to fade. The clock on my phone had read 9:47 p.m. when I stepped into my father's garage, a place that once smelled like safety and weekend projects but now carried the cold, sharp scent of metal and unfinished arguments. I had come only to grab a small box of old uniforms and a folder of medical documents for my next appointment. Nothing dramatic, nothing emotional. But the moment the door shut behind me, I felt the air shift the way air shifts before a storm breaks. Vivian stood a few feet away, arms crossed tightly, eyes narrowed with that familiar mix of superiority and resentment she reserved only for me. I felt my shoulders tense, the instinctive reaction of someone who has learned over many years that her presence rarely meant anything good. She did not greet me. She did not ask why I was there. Instead, she stepped closer and her voice came out sharp and echoing through the garage. "Show me the ultrasound." The way she said it made my stomach twist, not from the pregnancy, but from the disbelief that even now, even at this fragile stage of my life, she still believed cruelty was a form of control. I told her no. I told her it was my medical file and none of her business. I told her I was carrying a real child who deserved peace. I thought if I stayed calm, she might back down. I was wrong. She started insisting that I was pretending that I wanted money, that I was trying to manipulate my father. Her voice rose and rose until it felt like the walls were closing in around me. Then she said the words that carved themselves into my memory. "Fake pregnancy. I am not falling for your tricks." There was no pause, no hesitation, no flicker of doubt in her expression. Before I could step back or raise my hands or explain anything, her foot connected with my stomach in a burst of pressure so sudden my breath vanished from my lungs. I folded to the ground like someone had cut invisible strings that held me upright. The cold floor hit my cheek. Pain spread in waves that blurred the edges of my vision. I curled instinctively around my abdomen, both arms pressing in as if my body could protect the tiny heartbeat inside me. My mind screamed, but my mouth could not form any sound. I could barely hear Vivian as she snapped something under her breath, then turned and slammed the door behind her with a finality that felt almost triumphant. She left me there in the dim garage with only the low hum of the water heater and the smell of old engine oil. For a moment, I could not tell if the pounding in my ears was fear or the blood rushing through my body trying to hold everything together. I tried to breathe slowly the way my doctor had once told me to when my symptoms flared up. My hands shook uncontrollably. All I could think was, if I lose this baby, she will finally win. The thought hit me harder than the kick had. I tried to move, but another sharp spasm forced me to stay still. I remember staring at the shadow of the toolbox a few inches from me and thinking how small I felt in that moment. Small and alone. Yet somewhere under the panic, a flicker of survival instinct pushed through. I dragged my hand across the floor, searching for my phone, which had fallen from my pocket. My fingers brushed the corner of it, and with what felt like the last strength in my body, I pulled it close and pressed the screen. The numbers blurred. I blinked until they came into focus and dialed 911. My voice barely came out, but the operator heard enough to send help. I do not remember ending the call. I only remember the cold of the concrete and the slow fading of the world around me as I whispered to my unborn child that I was trying, that I would not let anything happen to us. The garage felt darker and darker until it became one single heavy shadow swallowing everything. Before consciousness slipped away, I heard distant sirens rising like a lifeline through the night. When I opened my eyes again, hours later in a hospital room with bright lights and the steady beep of a monitor, I realized that the story I had spent years trying to avoid was no longer avoidable. My name is Staff Sergeant Lauren Bishop, and this is the story of how my stepmother tried to destroy me until the father of my child, a 3-star general, revealed everything. My hands are still trembling as I write this, not from the cold Iowa air outside the window, but from everything my body has carried over the past few days. I am lying on a borrowed bed in a quiet guest room in Des Moines. the soft yellow lamp beside me casting a calm glow that feels almost foreign after the chaos. The room belongs to Captain Jenna Morales, a friend from my unit who did not hesitate for a second when she heard what happened. She drove to Cedar Rapids the moment the hospital cleared me to leave and insisted I stay with her until I could breathe without flinching. I thought I would feel safe once I left my father's house and the hospital, but safety is a strange thing. It does not return all at once. It comes back in small waves and sometimes just slips through your fingers. Tonight, it feels close yet still slightly out of reach. Every time I close my eyes, I see the concrete floor of the garage and the shadow of the toolbox beside my face. I hear the echo of Vivian's voice and the sharpness of that moment. My body may be lying on a soft mattress right now, but my mind has not completely stepped out of that darkness. I keep touching my stomach without even realizing it, checking for movement, waiting for the reassurance the doctor gave me to settle deeper into my bones. 13 weeks, still safe, still strong. I repeat those words to myself the way someone repeats a prayer they are afraid to stop saying. The air in this room is warm, scented faintly with lavender from the diffuser Jenna always uses after long shifts. It is such a gentle smell that I almost break down every time I breathe it in because it feels like something I have been missing for years, something simple and kind. I keep thinking that if this had happened to another woman, if this were one of the soldiers I mentor or even a stranger I met only once, I would tell her to pack a bag to call a friend to get out now before the damage becomes permanent. Yet when it happened to me, I hesitated because that house, because that town, because that family still held pieces of my childhood, and I had convinced myself that maybe time would fix things, that maybe adults learn to love better as they grow older. I was wrong, and admitting that has been its own kind of ache. I am writing this because silence is how women like Vivian keep winning. Silence is how cycles repeat themselves. Silence is how daughters learn to shrink instead of stand tall. If you are here reading this part of my story, then thank you for staying even through the hardest sections. And if you are here, please consider liking this video so more survivors can find it. I promise the rest of the story is not just about what happened to me, but about what happened after, about how truth finally rose above fear. I was 8 years old when my childhood split open in a way I would not fully understand until much later. Before that year, my world had been small but warm. My mother had a gentle voice and a way of smoothing chaos without ever raising her own. She kept the house steady, even when my father worked long shifts and missed birthdays or school events. When she passed away in late autumn after a sudden illness, the house changed its shape overnight. Rooms felt colder. Dinner became silent. My father paced the kitchen like a man trying to outrun grief. I did not know how to comfort him. I barely knew how to comfort myself. For months, it was just the two of us learning how to live around the empty spaces she left behind. Then, almost as quickly as she disappeared, someone else stepped into the center of my father's world. Her name was Vivian. She arrived with confident steps, crisp blouses, and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. My father lit up around her in a way that made me feel confused, as if love could simply be rewired and transferred. At first, I tried to convince myself that maybe she would bring some warmth back into our home. Maybe she would help my father breathe again. Maybe she might even like me. But children have an instinct adults often ignore. I noticed the small things first, the things too subtle for my father to catch. The way she stiffened when I entered a room. The way she corrected me before I even finished a sentence. The way she touched items that belonged to my mother as if she were testing their weight, deciding what to keep and what to erase. Within weeks, Vivian managed to position herself as the decision-maker in every corner of the house. She told my father that a child needed firm boundaries, that I needed to be taught, respect that I was acting out because I missed my mother. At 8 years old, I learned that words could be used as tools and sometimes as traps. Vivian began replacing my mother's routines with her own. She reorganized my room without asking, throwing away a scrapbook I had made with my mother, claiming it was old and falling apart. When I cried, she stood in the doorway with her arms crossed, telling me I was being dramatic. My father later repeated her words back to me almost exactly. That was when I realized she spoke through him, using his voice to deliver her judgments. It was the earliest form of gaslighting I ever experienced, though at the time I did not know the term. All I knew was that no matter what happened, somehow it always became my fault. If a plate cracked in the sink, it was because I washed dishes too roughly. If the living room plant wilted, it was because I forgot to water it, even though I had never been asked to. If I misplaced a book, Vivian would claim I was careless. If she misplaced a book, she said I had moved it. I tried telling my father that she was blaming me for everything, but he brushed it off with a tired smile and told me I was imagining things. I began doubting my own perceptions because that is what gaslighting does. It reshapes reality until you question every step you take. The worst night came during winter break. I had answered Vivian with a quiet but honest tone when she accused me of losing a pair of earrings she had left on the kitchen counter. I told her I had not seen them. She insisted I must have misplaced them. When I repeated myself, she turned to my father and said I was being disrespectful. He looked exhausted and overwhelmed, and instead of defending me, he told me to apologize. The injustice burned in my chest, and I remember whispering that it was not fair not this time. The moment the words left my mouth, I saw Vivian's expression sharpen. She told me in a cold, steady voice to kneel in the hallway until I learned how to speak to adults. I thought it would be 10 minutes, maybe 20, but time stretched and stretched. The hallway light buzzed above me, my knees ached, my throat tightened. Neither of them came to check on me. Vivian passed by once holding a laundry basket. She did not say anything. She did not look down. I stayed there for 3 hours because I was 8, because I did not know I could say no, because I thought enduring it might make everything better. It did not. After that night, something inside me shifted. I learned to move quietly. I learned to predict her moods. I learned to shrink myself so my existence would not inconvenience her. My father grew more distant, relying on Vivian's version of events instead of mine. Over time, she erased my place in the house piece by piece. Decisions were whispered behind closed doors. Outings happened without me. Holidays became tense performances of forced family unity. I spent more time alone in my room than anywhere else practicing the habit of disappearing without physically leaving. The foundation for who I would become later was laid right there in that suffocating hallway on those aching knees. A child learning she was an outsider in her own home. A daughter realizing her voice carried no weight. A girl absorbing the quiet truth that some people will resent you simply for existing. By the time I turned 18, I had already mastered survival. I just had not yet learned how to escape. By the time I entered high school, the quiet hope that things might get better had already faded into something more realistic. I knew Vivian was not going to warm up to me. I knew my father would always take her side. I knew the house operated on rules that changed depending on her moods. What I did not know then was how much more control she would try to exert over my life once I reached an age where independence threatened her authority. High school should have been a time to explore clubs and sports and friendships. My guidance counselor encouraged me to join the debate team because I loved public speaking. A teacher suggested I audition for choir. I wanted to sign up for track even though I was not the fastest runner, but I liked the idea of pushing my limits. Vivian shut every single door before I could even touch the handle. She told my father that extracurricular activities would distract me from academics, that they would expose me to the wrong crowd, that good girls stayed home and focused on family. My father repeated her reasoning almost word for word, which had become a pattern by then. He told me he wanted me safe and focused and that there was no need to overextend myself. He said it kindly, which somehow made it worse because his softness felt like a blanket smothering rather than comforting. Vivian framed it as care, but it was control. She kept my schedule tight and monitored. I had to come straight home after school. If I lingered too long in the hallway, she questioned me about who I talked to. If I talked to anyone, she wanted to know for how long and why. At first, I obeyed because resistance only led to arguments I would never win, but during sophomore year, something inside me began resisting quietly. I would stay a few minutes longer at my locker. I would walk slowly through the cafeteria pretending to tie my shoes just to hear laughter that was not mine. I would offer to help teachers carry boxes after class so I could breathe for 5 minutes without being scrutinized. Vivian noticed every minor deviation as if she had set invisible tripwires around my life. The more I grew, the more she tightened her grip. Her greatest tactic was simple but effective. She made my father believe that I was untrustworthy. She planted seeds of doubt daily. One Friday in October, she staged the first major event of what I would later recognize as her strategy to isolate me completely. I had perfect attendance at school, but one afternoon, Vivian walked into the living room holding a printed email that she claimed the school sent her. According to her, it reported that I had skipped 3 classes during the previous week. My father's face hardened as he looked at the paper. I tried to explain that I had not missed anything, that the email was fake, that the entire thing did not make sense, but Vivian raised her voice over mine, claiming she found the email in the junk folder and that it looked suspicious because I had deleted the original. She said she had always suspected I was running around with friends behind their backs. My father asked me why I had lied. His disappointment landed like a stone in my chest because I had done nothing wrong. Later, I realized the formatting of the email was off and the grammar was wrong, but at 14, I did not think to question it. I only questioned myself. Vivian did not stop there. She took the fabricated evidence and expanded it into a narrative. She told neighbors that I had been acting out. She told her friends that I was becoming difficult. She whispered to my father at night that he needed to discipline me more strictly for my own good. Her words painted me as a problem long before I ever resisted anything. My father absorbed her stories until he believed them completely. The day that still lingers in my memory came the following spring. I was returning home carrying brochures from colleges that had visited our school. I knew I was young, but looking at those pamphlets made me imagine a future beyond the walls that had kept me small for so long. I walked through the front yard, holding them against my chest. Vivian opened the door before I reached it. She saw the brochures and accused me of wasting time and pretending to be something I was not. I told her calmly that the guidance counselor had handed them out to everyone. That small attempt to defend myself seemed to ignite something in her. We were standing near the driveway, and Mrs. Collins, our neighbor, was watering her garden only a few feet away. Vivian stepped closer and slapped me. It was quick and sharp and shocking, not just for the pain, but because she had never struck me outside the house before. My vision blurred for a moment, and when I looked up, she was already speaking loudly to my father, who had stepped outside asking what happened. She said I had shouted at her. She said I had been disrespectful. She said she only reacted because she felt threatened. Mrs. Collins glanced at me with sympathy but did not intervene, and I did not blame her. Most people avoid stepping into family conflicts even when they know something is wrong. My father told me to apologize, which I did because I had learned the script a long time ago. That night, I stared at my reflection in the bathroom mirror and saw the quiet truth staring back at me. No matter what I did, the story would always be rewritten against me. That realization did not break me. It built me. Slowly, deliberately, I began shaping myself into someone who could leave. I focused on grades. I woke up early and trained on my own running laps in the park before school. I saved money from tutoring classmates. I practiced discipline like it was my only lifeline. Because it was. I knew the day would come when staying would cost me more than leaving ever could, and by the time I turned 18, I was ready. I just needed the right door to open. The day I turned 18, I packed everything I owned into 2 worn duffel bags and walked out of the house without looking back. There was no dramatic confrontation, no last-minute plea from my father, no apology from Vivian. Just the quiet sound of the front door closing behind me and the overwhelming relief of air that suddenly felt easier to breathe. For the first time in years, I felt the possibility of becoming someone other than the version of me they had tried so hard to shape. Within a few weeks, I enlisted in the Iowa National Guard. I still remember the recruiter placing the paperwork in front of me and saying that service would give me structure, purpose, and a chance to stand on my own. Those words felt like a promise. At basic training, I discovered something I had never truly experienced before: respect. No one cared about Vivian's opinions or the distorted stories she spread. No one treated me like I was fragile or unreasonable. Instead, I was measured by my effort, by my discipline, by how well I worked with others. The first time a drill sergeant said "Good job, Bishop" after a difficult field exercise, I almost cried because I could not remember the last time an adult had acknowledged my worth without twisting it into something small. The guard became the first place where the ground beneath me felt steady. The rules were clear, the expectations consistent. If you worked hard, you earned trust. If you showed up, you were part of the team. I built friendships that made the loneliness of my earlier years feel less sharp. We shared cold mornings at the range, late nights during drills, and long conversations about the kind of lives we hoped to build. For the first time, I belonged somewhere. My relationship with my father faded naturally during those years. We spoke only occasionally. Our conversations were polite, but distant. He always sounded distracted, always echoing whatever Vivian believed. I learned not to expect anything from him, and strangely, that made it easier to move forward. In the Guard, I became a technician working in support roles during cyber training exercises. I liked the problem-solving, the precision, and the way tasks fit into bigger missions. Most importantly, my position kept me far removed from the chain of command connected to U.S. Army Cyber Command, which meant I had no possible link to the senior leadership in Virginia. At that time, I did not know that detail would matter later, but life has a way of setting up the pieces long before you realize a pattern is starting to form. Outside of weekend drills and annual training, I built a quiet life for myself. I rented a small apartment in Des Moines. I worked part-time at a community college, assisting with computer labs. I kept my routines simple: morning runs, evening study sessions, Sundays at the farmer's market. My world was small but peaceful, which was something I had never known growing up. There were moments during those years when I would catch myself feeling unexpectedly steady, and that steadiness frightened me a little. Peace felt unfamiliar and fragile, like something that could be taken away the way everything had been taken from me as a child. But each year added another thin layer of confidence, another reminder that I had escaped the worst of it. When I turned 28, I realized I had built a life without realizing it, one that did not revolve around fear. My home was quiet in a comforting way. My friendships were real. My work had meaning. I no longer flinched at sudden noises or checked over my shoulder the way I once had. I thought the painful chapters of my past had finally closed. What I did not know was that life was about to shift again, not backward the way trauma had shifted it before, but sideways in a way that would force me to confront everything I thought I understood about resilience, trust, and love. And that shift began with a chance meeting far from home on a training trip I never expected to change anything at all. In 2024, my life settled into a quiet, predictable rhythm built around drill schedules, training rotations, and the steady routines of my civilian job. By then, I had become a technician supporting cyber training exercises for units across the region. The work was detailed and often demanding, but it suited me. I liked the structure, the problem-solving, and the feeling that my role mattered even if it was rarely visible to others. I spent long hours testing systems, adjusting configurations, and helping soldiers troubleshoot equipment failures before major simulations. Most days I felt capable and steady, but as spring edged into summer, something in my body began to shift in ways I could not explain. At first, it was small things: a wave of dizziness when I stood up too fast, a faint pressure behind my eyes during long training days, a kind of fatigue that lingered no matter how much sleep I tried to get. I told myself it was stress, or dehydration, or the usual wear that came from juggling duty and work. I had never been someone who allowed myself to slow down, and old habits are hard to unlearn. Over the next few months, the episodes grew more noticeable. One afternoon during a large-scale cyber exercise at Camp Dodge, I leaned over a console to check a connection, and the room tilted unexpectedly. The floor felt like it was rolling under my feet, and for a moment, everything dimmed at the edges. I steadied myself on a desk and forced a breath in, hoping no one noticed. Later that evening during a break, my friend, Sergeant Kelly, asked if I was all right. She said my face had gone pale and that I had swayed a little. I laughed it off, but she did not let it go. She told me that blackouts were not something to ignore. I nodded, but deep down I felt a strange mixture of fear and stubbornness. Years of being told I was overreacting had carved their mark more deeply than I wanted to admit. Through the fall, the symptoms continued. Twice, I had to sit down unexpectedly during a training session because the room spun without warning. Once I fainted for a few seconds in the supply room and woke up with the metallic taste of adrenaline in my mouth. Kelly gave me a bottle of water and another talk about seeing a doctor. She was kind about it but firm in a way I respected. She told me that my body was trying to tell me something and that ignoring it was not strength, it was denial. I promised her I would schedule an appointment, but I kept putting it off. Every time I reached for my phone to call the clinic, a familiar old voice resurfaced in my mind. It was Vivian's voice, that sharp, dismissive tone she used whenever I mentioned illness or exhaustion. Even after all the years away from her, some part of me still reacted to that old conditioning. One evening, after a particularly difficult fainting spell, I sat on my couch, gathering the courage to make the clinic appointment. As if on cue, my phone buzzed with a message from my father's number, though I knew instantly it was her writing it. She had developed the habit of messaging me when she felt like reminding me she still existed in my orbit. She wrote, "Stop being dramatic. You always want attention. Maybe you just want time off." I stared at the words for a long moment. They did not hurt the way they once had, but they still tapped that old bruise deep inside me. A bruise formed from years of being told that my pain was imaginary. I closed the message without responding. I sat quietly for a while, letting the room settle around me. My apartment felt steady, but my body did not. When I finally stood to get a glass of water, another dizzy spell hit. This one stronger than the others. I had to grip the counter until the world stopped spinning. That was the moment I realized I could not keep pretending everything was fine. Something was changing and I needed answers. I made the appointment the next morning. It felt like an act of defiance, not against the dizziness, but against the years of conditioning that told me my needs were inconvenient. I did not know then that the doctor visit would reveal the beginning of the most unexpected chapter of my life, or that it would lead me into a future where nothing looked the way I once imagined it. I only knew that I was tired of ignoring the signals my own body was sending, and that for the first time in a long time, I was ready to listen. I met Lieutenant General Marcus Hale on a cool September morning in 2024 during a regional cyber defense symposium at Fort McCoy, a place where soldiers in uniform and civilians in business attire often crossed paths without quite knowing how to read each other. I had been assigned to assist with equipment checks and workstation setup for one of the breakout rooms, nothing glamorous, just the kind of behind-the-scenes work that kept larger events running smoothly. I liked tasks like that because they gave me a purpose without putting me under too much direct scrutiny. I was tightening cables behind a terminal when I heard a calm voice ask if he was in the right room. I turned and saw a tall man with silver hair and a posture shaped by decades of leadership. The 3 stars on his uniform caught the fluorescent light. For a second, I froze, not out of intimidation, but because I rarely interacted with officers of that rank. Most soldiers spent entire careers without ever standing 3 feet from a general, let alone a lieutenant general. I answered his question and gestured toward the seating area. He thanked me with a tone so natural it surprised me. I expected formality or distance, but his presence felt steady rather than imposing. When he noticed I was still crouched beside the console, he asked if I needed a hand. The idea of a 3-star general helping reconnect cables made me almost laugh, but he said it with sincerity, not theatrics. I told him I had it under control. He nodded and stepped aside without hovering or assuming authority over a task he knew nothing about. That detail registered with me instantly. Throughout the day, our paths crossed several more times, always in small ways. He asked me for directions to another briefing. He thanked me for adjusting a malfunctioning monitor. He treated me the same way he treated the colonels and civilian analysts crowded around him, with a kind of quiet attentiveness that stood out in a room full of people accustomed to speaking louder than they listened. Later that afternoon, while I was replacing a lagging workstation, he approached again this time, asking whether I worked directly under Cyber Command. His tone was conversational, not interrogative. When I told him I was Iowa Guard and part of a supporting unit, he nodded thoughtfully and said the words that would echo in my mind much later when everything in my life became tangled around this connection. Good. We are not in the same chain of command. His clarity felt respectful rather than cautious. He was drawing a boundary to protect me, not to distance himself. After his keynote lecture, he lingered to talk with some of the technicians. It surprised me how naturally conversations flowed around him. He asked thoughtful questions. He listened more than he spoke. When he eventually asked about my work, I found myself opening up more than I expected. Not about my past or anything personal, just about my role, the challenges of cyber readiness, the evolving nature of training. He listened without interrupting, and I felt seen in a way I had not experienced in years. Over the next few weeks, we exchanged a handful of emails about follow-up materials from the symposium. Nothing flirtatious, nothing inappropriate, just exchanges rooted in shared interests and mutual respect. Then one evening, he asked if I would be attending the next regional workshop. When I told him yes, he asked if we could grab coffee beforehand to discuss a topic I had brought up about small unit cyber integration. The conversation over coffee ended up stretching into 2 hours, then into a walk around the training grounds, then into something subtle but unmistakable. A connection. One built not on rank or power, but on trust and the rare feeling of being listened to without judgment. I did not know where it would lead, but for the first time in a long time, I did not feel small. I felt seen. I felt steady. And more than anything, I felt safe. By early winter, the connection between Marcus and me had grown into something steady and warm, something I had not expected but no longer felt afraid of. We never rushed anything. We moved carefully, thoughtfully, with an ease that came from two people who had lived enough life to know the value of quiet steadiness. I trusted him in a way I had not trusted anyone in years. So when my cycle was late in January, I felt a jolt of fear that cut through every layer of calm I had built. At first, I tried to explain it away as stress or travel or the long hours at work, but something in me knew that this was different. One cold Saturday morning, I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at a pregnancy test on my nightstand, too nervous to reach for it. When I finally did, the result appeared so quickly it felt like the world shifted beneath me. Pregnant. 6 weeks, the clinic confirmed a few days later. I sat on the examination table with my hands clasped tightly as the nurse explained what to expect. What I should eat, how I should adjust physical activity, all the basic things first-time mothers hear. I nodded, but the words felt muffled like I was hearing them through thick glass. My mind kept drifting to Marcus. I had no idea how he would react. When I told him later that evening, he sat quietly for a long moment, not in shock, but in thought. His expression was calm, but focused, the kind of focus he probably used when preparing for briefings or complicated missions. Then he reached across the table and took my hand gently. "This is not something we planned," he said, "but it is something we will face together." Not once did he raise his voice. Not once did he question my honesty. Not once did he express fear of responsibility. Instead, he asked how I felt not just physically, but emotionally. He asked if I needed anything. He asked what the doctor had said. He asked what would make me feel stable in the coming weeks. His reaction grounded me. I expected tension or panic, but he gave me stability. I did not realize how rare that kind of response was until I shared the news with my father. I called him one evening hoping for something like support, or at least a neutral response. Instead, the line went quiet for a long time before I heard Vivian's voice in the background asking loudly if I had finally confessed my little plan. She must have been standing right beside him because he put the call on speaker without telling me. Her voice came through sharp and clear. "So who is he, Lauren? Some old man with a retirement check. Are you looking for a way out of responsibility?" I felt my stomach twist in a familiar way, the way it used to when she cornered me as a teenager. I tried to ignore her and asked my father to speak privately, but she cut in again. "I know your tricks. A fake pregnancy. How convenient. You think you can trap a wealthy older man by faking a child." I could barely breathe. My father said nothing to stop her. He did not tell her she was out of line. He did not defend me. He stayed silent in that passive way that felt like a quiet endorsement. I tried to explain the truth, but she kept talking over me. The fact that she believed she had the right to speak to me that way, even now, made my hands shake. When I told her I had already seen a doctor, she laughed, a short, cruel sound I had not heard in years but recognized instantly. "Anyone can find a clinic willing to sign a paper," she said. I realized in that moment that no matter how much time had passed, Vivian would always look for ways to chip away at any good thing in my life. The call ended abruptly when she claimed she had better things to do, and my father mumbled something about needing to go. I sat on my couch afterward, staring at my phone in disbelief. I should not have been surprised. If my own childhood had taught me anything, it was that Vivian never reacted with kindness when something good happened to me. But something about this moment felt different. It carried more weight. I was no longer a teenager she could manipulate. I was 30 years old, serving in the National Guard, building a stable life and preparing to become a mother. Yet her voice still pierced something deep inside me. Over the next few days, she sent messages accusing me of lying, of trying to take advantage of an older man, of staging everything for sympathy. Each one chipped at my calm until I finally stopped opening them. Marcus listened quietly as I explained and did not push me to respond or engage. Instead, he said something that anchored me. Her words do not define you. Her fear does. That sentence stayed with me because I knew it was true. Vivian feared losing control. She feared being wrong. She feared seeing me form a life outside the shadow she had spent years casting over my father. The moment she heard I was pregnant, the seeds of conflict were planted deeply. I sensed even then that whatever was coming would not stay small. I just did not know yet how far she would go. The weeks that followed should have been filled with cautious excitement and quiet planning, but Vivian's intrusion arrived like a shadow, stretching itself across every corner of my life. At first, it came into the form of messages, sharp and relentless, appearing on my phone at all hours. She wrote things like, "You cannot fool everyone forever, and stop pretending you are special and no one believes you are actually pregnant." Each message carried that familiar sting. The same tone she had used when I was a child. The same calculated jabs meant to destabilize me. I blocked her number, but she simply used my father's phone instead. When I blocked that one, she used email. When I blocked email, she created new ones. It felt endless. I told myself to ignore it to protect my peace for the sake of the baby, but stress does not need permission to slip into your life. Around that same time, I noticed a shift in how some of my coworkers behaved around me. Not everyone, just a few, but enough for me to sense something was wrong. They asked strange questions with careful voices. They glanced at my stomach when they thought I was not paying attention. Finally, one of them, a specialist I had worked with for years, pulled me aside and told me quietly that he had received a strange call from a woman claiming to be my stepmother. He looked uncomfortable even mentioning it. She told him that I was lying about my pregnancy and planning to use it as an excuse to ask for special accommodations. She told him I had a history of exaggerating illnesses. She even hinted that I was trying to secure benefits through deceit. My stomach tightened as he explained. He assured me he did not believe her, but he wanted me to know because she had also reached out to one of the civilian analysts. The realization made my skin crawl. Vivian was not just attacking me. She was attacking my reputation, my work, the place I had built brick by brick through years of discipline and effort. It made me nauseous to think of her dragging my name into conversations with people who had never even met her. I wanted to confront her, to push back, to tell her to stop interfering in a life she had no right to touch, but every time I imagined raising my voice or stepping into conflict, I felt a tightening low in my abdomen. The memory of that first dizzy spell resurfaced. I could not risk stress spiraling into something worse. For the baby's sake, I needed to stay steady. But Vivian was not done. One afternoon during a training weekend at the armory, she showed up unannounced. I was in the hallway reviewing equipment lists with my team when I heard my name spoken sharply. I turned and saw her standing near the entrance wearing a heavy coat and that familiar, brittle expression. My heart dropped. She had never come to my workplace before. Soldiers nearby turned to look. Vivian marched toward me with the certainty of someone who believed she had every right to be there. I told her firmly that this was not the place for personal matters, but she ignored me completely. Her voice rose loud enough for it to echo off the walls. She demanded to know why I was lying. She said she wanted proof. She accused me of using the guard to support my lies. I felt heat rush to my face, but I stayed still. A lieutenant stepped forward and asked if everything was all right. Vivian immediately switched to a wounded tone, telling him that she was deeply concerned that her stepdaughter was pretending to be pregnant for attention. My hands shook. I could feel every pair of eyes in the hallway on me. I wanted to disappear. I wanted to scream. I wanted her to stop. Instead, I forced a breath in and kept my voice steady. I told the lieutenant she was not authorized to be on site and asked him politely to escort her out. He did so gently but firmly. Even as she was being led back toward the entrance, she kept speaking loudly, insisting she was trying to protect me, insisting I was unstable, insisting I had a history of lying. The words stuck to the air like smoke long after she stepped outside. When the doors closed behind her, the silence felt heavy. One of my teammates placed a hand on my shoulder, but I stepped away and told everyone I was fine. I was not fine. I felt like I was standing on thin glass. That night, when I returned home, I sat on the edge of my bed with my hands on my stomach and tried to slow my breathing. I wanted to fight back, but every instinct told me that escalating the situation would only give her more ways to twist things. The baby needed calm. The baby needed safety. I told myself that silence was not weakness but strategy, that if I remained patient and careful and steady, the truth would defend itself eventually. I just did not yet know how far Vivian was willing to go to keep her version of the story alive. December 2nd of 2025 began as an ordinary winter day in Cedar Rapids, the kind that carries a soft quiet under the cold sky. I had driven to my father's house after work because he claimed he still had one of my old boxes stored in the garage and that it was taking up space. The conversation felt strangely rushed, almost rehearsed, but I told myself not to overthink it. I just wanted to pick up the box and leave. The sun had already set when I pulled into the driveway. The porch light flickered weakly. I hesitated for a moment, hand resting on my stomach, feeling the faint sense of almost routine discomfort that had become familiar during my pregnancy. 13 weeks. I reminded myself that everything had looked normal at my last checkup. I stepped out of the car and walked toward the garage door. My father was not outside. The house looked still, too still. I knocked once out of courtesy, then pushed the side door open. The garage smelled of cold metal and old motor oil, a scent I had known since childhood. I had only taken 2 steps inside when I heard the sharp click of heels on concrete behind me. I turned. Vivian stood in the doorway, arms folded tightly, eyes narrowed into slits. She did not look surprised to see me. She looked prepared. I kept my voice calm and asked about the box. She ignored the question entirely. Instead, she took a step forward and said the words that made my stomach tighten. "Show me the ultrasound." Her tone carried no curiosity, only accusation. I froze for half a second before answering. I told her the same thing I had told her every other time she demanded proof. My medical records were mine. They were private. I did not owe her anything, and I certainly did not need to justify the existence of my own pregnancy to a woman who had spent years denying every part of my life. Vivian's jaw clenched. The air in the garage shifted. I felt it the same way people sense a storm before it arrives. She closed the distance between us and repeated the demand louder. "Show me the ultrasound, Lauren. Right now." When I refused again, she stepped even closer, eyes burning with that familiar fury she reserved for moments when she felt her authority slipping. "Do you think I am stupid? Do you think anyone believes this? This ridiculous little performance?" I shook my head and told her I was not doing this. Not tonight. Not with her. I reached for the small cardboard box near the shelf, wanting to leave before her temper escalated, but she blocked my path with the precision of someone who had rehearsed the move. Then, everything happened quickly. Too quickly for my mind to process it in real time. Vivian shouted something I could not fully register. A blur of motion followed, and then her foot connected sharply with my abdomen. The impact sent a burst of pain through my body so sudden my breath vanished. The world tilted. I stumbled backward and hit the edge of a metal toolbox behind me. The corner struck my ribs, and a jolt of pain shot through my side as I collapsed onto the cold concrete floor. My hands flew to my stomach on instinct, a protective reaction older than thought. The concrete felt icy beneath my cheek, the air heavy and metallic. A buzzing filled my ears. Vivian stood above me for a moment, her expression unreadable except for the flicker of triumph she failed to hide. "Fake pregnancy," she muttered. "I am not falling for your tricks." Then she turned away. She walked to the door, pulled it open, stepped inside the house, and slammed it shut behind her. No hesitation. No pause. No look back to see if I was breathing. The sound echoed through the garage like a lid closing over a coffin. I lay there curled around myself as the pain pulsed in waves. Every breath felt shallow. Fear rose like a tide climbing my spine. I whispered to the baby voice, shaking even though the words barely left my lips. "Hold on. Please, hold on." I tried to push myself upright, but my arms trembled. The dizziness blurred the edges of the room. For a moment, I feared I might pass out right there in the cold, alone, unseen. I forced myself to reach for my coat pocket. Fingers numb, fumbling until I found my phone. The screen glowed faintly, almost mocking in its brightness. I tried to focus, tried to steady my vision. My fingertip hovered over the keypad, and I managed to dial 911. "Keen." My voice was barely a whisper when the operator answered, but she heard enough. She asked if I was safe. She asked if I could breathe. She asked if I could stay on the line. I tried to reply, but the words tangled in my throat. I felt my consciousness slipping, the edges of the world darkening like the slow closure of a curtain. Before everything went black, I heard distant sirens faint at first, then slowly growing louder as if they were pushing their way toward me through the night. In that last flicker of awareness, I thought of the baby again, a small heartbeat trying to survive inside a body collapsing under fear and impact. I remember thinking that if this was how the fight for my child began, then nothing about what came after would be easy. And then everything faded into silence. When I opened my eyes again, the world felt too bright. The ceiling lights above me glowed in a steady line, and for a moment I could not place where I was or how I had gotten there. A soft, beeping rhythm pulsed beside my head. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic clean and sharp. Then, the memory of the garage rushed back with such force that my breath hitched. My hand moved instantly to my stomach. A nurse noticed and stepped closer. Her voice was steady the way people sound when they are trained to calm others. "You are in Mercy Medical Center. You passed out, but you are stable now. The doctor will be in shortly." I nodded, though my throat felt tight. The nurse checked a monitor, made a few notes, and left the room with a quiet promise that someone would return soon. Minutes blurred until the doctor stepped inside, holding a tablet. He introduced himself, then pulled a stool beside my bed. His expression was serious, but not panicked, the expression of someone who has delivered difficult news before. He spoke gently. "Your baby is safe," he said first, as if he knew those were the only words I needed to hear. But the impact could have been fatal. "You came very close." My eyes filled before I could stop them. The room suddenly felt smaller. I asked him twice if he was sure. He nodded each time and explained what the scans showed, how the positioning of the pregnancy had protected the baby more than expected, and how lucky it was that help had arrived when it did. I listened closely, absorbing every word, every reassurance, every warning. After the doctor left, a social worker entered carrying a clipboard and a look that blended professionalism with concern. She introduced herself, then sat in the chair near my bed. I could tell she had already spoken with the EMTs. She asked what happened. Her questions were calm but precise, designed to document every detail. I answered slowly, my voice unsteady, describing the garage, the kick, the fall, the pain, the way Vivian walked away without looking back. The social worker's pen paused more than once, her eyes lifting in quiet disbelief. I told her I did not want to make things messy, that I just wanted to protect the baby, but she explained that what happened to me qualified as a serious assault, especially during pregnancy. She wrote down everything I said. She asked if I had a safe place to stay. I told her about my friend Jenna in Des Moines, and she made a note saying she would add that to the report. When she finally stood to leave, she rested her hand gently on the side of the bed. "You did the right thing calling for help. You are not alone in this." It had been a long time since anyone said words like that to me. After she left the room, grew quiet except for the machines beside me, I closed my eyes and tried to steady my breathing. I did not know how long I drifted in that half-aware state before the door opened again. The footsteps were heavier, purposeful, familiar in a way that made my heart catch. When I looked up, Marcus was standing in the doorway, still in uniform, still wearing the travel fatigue of someone who had crossed several states in one urgent push. He must have come straight from the airport. His eyes moved over me, taking in every detail: the hospital gown, the IV line, the bruising on my cheek. For a second, he looked as if he might break. Then he crossed the room in 3 long steps and took my hand with a gentleness that undid something deep inside me. "I am here," he said quietly. "I have got you." His voice held no anger at me, no judgment, no tension, only steady calm and fierce concern. I felt my shoulders drop for the first time since the garage. The room still smelled like antiseptic, and fear lingered in the back of my mind, but in that moment, with his hand wrapped around mine, I felt something I had not felt in a very long time. Safe. The morning after the hospital cleared me for observation, the investigation began moving faster than I expected. An officer from the Cedar Rapids Police Department arrived to take my statement. He was patient and methodical, asking me to go over every detail from the moment I entered the garage to the moment the paramedics lifted me onto the stretcher. Retelling everything made my chest tighten, but I did it slowly, carefully, because this time the truth mattered in a way it never had when I was a child under Vivian's narrative. This time, someone was actually listening. A few hours later, the officer returned with news that one of the neighbors across the street, a man named Mr. Dalton, had a garage camera positioned at an angle that captured part of my father's driveway. He had come outside the night before when he saw the flashing lights of the ambulance and immediately offered footage to the responding officers. I felt a small flicker of hope, hesitant but real, because evidence meant I was no longer trapped in Vivian's word against mine. The officer showed me a portion of the video on his tablet. The angle did not show the actual kick, but it captured almost everything leading up to it. I saw myself entering the garage. I saw Vivian following me. I saw her posture, her aggressive gestures, her finger stabbing the air as she shouted something no audio could catch. Then the footage showed my sudden collapse to the ground. It was not perfect, not the full picture, but it confirmed the sequence that led to the assault. The officer paused the video and said calmly that this alone would strengthen the case significantly. He explained that partial footage combined with physical evidence would carry real weight. That was the first moment I felt like the truth had a fighting chance. Later that afternoon, they examined the garage itself. The officers photographed the floor, the toolbox, and the area where I had fallen. But what stood out most was the pattern left on my clothing. The EMTs had preserved everything. The forensic techs compared the dirt and residue on my sweater with the footprint left on the concrete where I had landed. Then they compared that footprint with the soles of Vivian's boots. The match was exact. My stomach churned at the thought of how coldly she had walked away, but the investigator's tone remained steady as he explained the findings. Evidence spoke clearly, even when people tried to twist the story. Meanwhile, the social worker who had spoken to me the night before turned over copies of all the messages Vivian had sent in the previous months. I had screenshotted most of them. Accusations about pretending about lying about using pregnancy for attention. Many were cruel, others manipulative, all of them carrying the same pattern of targeted harassment. The investigator read them quietly, scrolling through with a growing frown. He asked me how long it had been going on. I told him the truth. Years, though, it had become worse once she learned about the baby. He nodded, making careful notes. Emotional harassment was often dismissed when typed out in text form, but he said these messages would still be considered contextual evidence of motive and ongoing hostility. In the early evening, the police contacted me again to tell me that Vivian had been asked to come in for questioning. I expected her to refuse or at least delay, but she went in the same day, likely convinced she could manipulate the narrative as she always had with my father. The officer described her demeanor as cooperative at first, almost overly polite, the way someone behaves when they are angling to portray themselves as the reasonable party. But the moment she was confronted with the evidence, her tone shifted. She claimed she had never touched me. She said I fell on my own. She said I had staged the entire thing. She even suggested that stress from my so-called unstable behavior had caused me to collapse. Hearing that secondhand made my hands tremble. It was the same script she had used my entire childhood, the same deflection, the same reversal. When that did not seem to persuade the investigators, she shifted strategies. She claimed that I had attacked her first, that she had acted in self-defense, that I had always been unpredictable, that my pregnancy was an exaggeration. She switched between stories so quickly that even the officers noticed the inconsistencies. When they presented the garage footage, she said the angle was misleading. When they showed her the footprint analysis, she said she had not worn those boots in weeks. When they mentioned the text messages, she said I had provoked her and that she was trying to protect the family. She never acknowledged the gravity of the situation, never admitted any possibility that her actions could have harmed the baby. Instead, she returned again and again to the idea that I was the problem, that she had spent years trying to correct me, that I had always been difficult. Her refusal to take responsibility would have devastated me years earlier, but now it only solidified how necessary it was for the truth to come out. An investigator later told me that her shifting explanations made things worse for her. Consistency mattered. Evidence mattered more. By the end of the interview, they informed her that the case would be forwarded for possible charges. She reportedly reacted with disbelief, insisting that my father would defend her and that the community would see her as a victim. It was strange hearing that because it reminded me of how deeply she believed in her own storyline, how much she trusted manipulation as a tool. She had used it successfully for so long that she truly thought it could shield her again. When the officer finished updating me, he asked how I felt about moving forward. His question was simple, but it landed heavily. I stared at the muted hospital television for a long moment before answering. I told him I wanted the truth documented. I wanted my baby safe. I wanted to break the pattern that had shaped so much of my life. When he left the room and the door closed softly behind him, I placed my hand over my stomach and breathed slowly. There was fear, yes, but there was also a growing steadiness inside me. The investigation was only beginning, but for the first time in years, Vivian's version of events no longer stood unchallenged. The truth had finally found its voice. 2 days after the police finished their preliminary reports, my father called me. I was still staying with Jenna in Des Moines, still moving slowly and holding my stomach each time I stood still, adjusting to the shock of everything that had happened. When his name appeared on my screen, I hesitated. Part of me wanted to ignore the call. Another part, the younger part that still remembered being 8 years old and wanting him to choose me, pressed the answer button. His voice came through tight and frustrated, not worried, not gentle, not even curious about whether I was healing. The first thing he said was not, "How are you?" or "Is the baby all right?" but "Lauren Kahn, lam qua moi chuin. You are exaggerating everything." The words dropped into my chest like small cold stones. He insisted the situation had been blown out of proportion, that misunderstandings happened, that families argue that I should not involve the police in private matters. I reminded him calmly that I had been taken away by ambulance, that there was physical evidence, medical reports, documentation, that this was not a simple argument. He brushed off every word. He said he had spoken to Vivian and that she was devastated. "Vivian said you slipped," he added sharply, as if quoting her was enough to erase the truth. My breath caught when he continued. "She said she tried to help you, but you pushed her away. That you always twist things to make her look bad. That she has loved you like her own daughter." I nearly laughed at the irony of it, except nothing about it felt funny. I asked him if he had even read the police report. He said he did not need to because he knew Vivian's character. I asked if he had seen the medical documentation. He said I was making a scene. I asked if he had watched the camera footage the neighbor provided. He said video can mislead. Every answer from him felt like a door slamming shut. Not because I expected better from him, but because I realized how deep the denial ran. He did not want the truth. He wanted comfort. He wanted the familiar narrative in which Vivian was the stable one and I was the problem. And he wanted that narrative so badly he was willing to ignore the fact that his grandchild had been put at risk. At one point, he raised his voice, saying that if I kept pushing this, the entire town would talk. He said I was hurting the family. He said he did not understand why I would do this to them. Them, not me. Not his daughter lying bruised in a hospital bed. Them. I felt something inside me shift again. Not the small, fragile shifts I had felt as a child, but something firmer, sharper, decisive. I told him the truth clearly and without hesitation. Dad, she kicked me in the stomach while I was pregnant. He went silent, but it was not the silence of realization. It was the silence of someone searching for another excuse. I could almost hear him thinking. Then he said something that ended the conversation entirely. "You should not have provoked her." That sentence drew a clean line straight through the last piece of hope I had left for him. I felt the final thread snap. I told him I would not speak to him again until he accepted reality and stopped allowing Vivian to speak for him. I told him that my child's safety mattered more than protecting anyone's pride. He tried to interrupt, but I continued saying calmly that if he chose to stand with her, then he was choosing to stand against me. He muttered something about regret, about family loyalty, about me making everything harder. I ended the call before he could continue. My hands shook, but not from fear, from clarity. For the first time in my life, I understood that wanting a parent's love does not obligate you to accept their blindness. Vivian had always been the architect of cruelty, but my father had been the one who let her build the structure around us. And now he was defending her even when a child's life was at stake. That night, I sat on the couch with a blanket over my knees and my phone turned face down. Jenna brought me tea and did not ask questions until I was ready to speak. When I finally told her what my father had said, she placed a hand on my shoulder and said simply, "You get to choose your family from now on." Her words felt like a soft landing after a long fall. As I lay in bed later with my hand resting on my stomach, I realized something important. I was not just protecting myself now. I was protecting a future. And that future had no room for people who refused to see the truth. That was the night I made my decision. I cut the final emotional ties to the house that had shaped so much of my pain. I chose my child. I chose my peace. I chose myself. The storm did not break all at once. It built quietly the way tension settles over a small town long before anyone is willing to name it. After the investigation began, Vivian did what she had always done best. She rewrote the story. She went to neighbors. She whispered in grocery store aisles. She called old family friends. She spun herself into a trembling victim who had been attacked by her unstable stepdaughter. She said I had thrown myself to the ground. She said I had staged everything. She said the police were confused, that the hospital exaggerated, that I had always been dramatic. And because small towns cling to gossip with the same strength they cling to tradition, rumors spread like frost on windows, thin, at first, then thick enough to obscure everything. By the end of the week, Jenna told me that people at her workplace had overheard conversations about me, that Vivian was worried sick, that she was trying to protect the family, that Lauren always had problems. I felt sick, not just from pregnancy nausea or the dull ache still lingering across my ribs, but from the fear that the truth could be swallowed again by her version of events. When Marcus heard how far the rumors had spread, he paced the length of Jenna's living room with a steady, controlled fury I had never seen in him before. He wasn't loud. He didn't curse. He didn't threaten. The most dangerous people never need to raise their voices. Finally, he stopped, turned toward me and said, "This ends publicly. Permanently." I blinked, unsure what he meant. "A town meeting?" he continued. "A community hall gathering. She wants an audience. We'll give her one. But this time with the truth." My heart hammered. "Marcus, I don't want a spectacle." He crouched beside the couch, his hands gentle on my knees. "It's already a spectacle. She made it one. Now we take control of it. You won't speak. You won't defend yourself. I will handle everything. And I will do it where every person she lied to can hear the truth at the same time." There was something so steady in his voice that the fear eased slightly. 2 days later, Cedar Rapids announced a community discussion regarding misinformation and safety concerns hosted at the community hall on a Saturday evening. Word spread fast, especially through the same rumor channels Vivian had been using. People were curious. Shock sells. Outrage sells more. They wanted to see drama. They wanted to see someone exposed. Vivian arrived early. I sat in the back row with Jenna, my hands folded over my stomach. Vivian walked into the hall wearing a beige coat and an expression so smug it looked carved onto her face. She greeted people, placing a delicate, trembling hand on her chest, wiping imaginary tears from her eyes as she dramatically whispered about the terrible things I had put her through. My father followed slightly behind her, not touching her but orbiting her the way he always had. His shoulders were tight. His jaw was set. He looked like a man convinced he had chosen the morally superior ground. The hall filled quickly. Farmers, shop owners, retirees, teenagers, church volunteers, neighbors I hadn't seen in years. They weren't there to support me. They were there because Vivian had given them a story to feast on. It didn't matter. Marcus said they only needed the truth once. When he arrived, the doors at the front opened and a silence rippled backward through the room like a cold front rolling in. He wasn't in civilian clothes. He walked in wearing his Class A Army service uniform. Deep navy fabric polished shoes, ribbons and medals aligned with surgical precision, and above his left chest gleaming under the fluorescent lights were 3 silver stars, a lieutenant general. Even people with no military ties recognized immediately what that meant. Power, authority, credibility. A veteran near the front stood straighter. A teenage boy whispered, "Oh my God!" A woman clasped her hand over her mouth, and Vivian, who had been smiling and gesturing dramatically moments earlier, froze with her lips parted mid-sentence. The sound in the room died instantly. Marcus walked to the front of the hall with a calmness that could silence a riot. He set a laptop on the podium, connected it to the projector, then scanned the room until his eyes landed on Vivian. "Thank you for being here," he began, voice level and deep. "There have been rumors circulating about Staff Sergeant Lauren Bishop about her mental stability, her integrity, her pregnancy, and her behavior. Tonight, I am here to address these rumors with evidence." Vivian let out a small, shaky laugh. "General, I'm sure you're being misled." He lifted one hand sharply. "Do not interrupt." The authority in his tone was so commanding that even people in the back row straightened subconsciously. Vivian's mouth snapped shut. Marcus clicked the first video file. The screen filled with the grainy footage from the neighbor's camera. People watched silently as they saw me walk into the garage. They saw Vivian follow. They saw her shouting, pointing, crowding the doorway as I collapsed out of frame. A few gasps rippled through the room. Before anyone could speak, he switched to another document, a photo of the bruising on my abdomen taken by hospital staff. Then a medical report noting the trauma and the risk to the pregnancy. Then the forensic analysis of the footprint. Then copies of Vivian's text messages projected 40 inches wide, cruel words enlarged for everyone to read. Vivian's hands flew to her mouth. My father stared at the screen with a hollow expression, his face draining of color. Marcus glanced around the room, letting the weight of the evidence settle. Then he said the sentence that would replay in the minds of every person present for years. "Lauren is carrying my child, and you nearly killed your own grandchild." The words echoed through the hall loud enough to shake the air. Gasps, murmurs, shock rolling in like thunder. Vivian staggered as if the floor had dropped beneath her. She looked from me to Marcus to the projected screen as if trying to reorder the world into the version she had created in her head, but nothing fit anymore. Nothing matched. My father looked like someone had taken the walls of his life and shattered them in front of him. For once, he wasn't angry or defensive or dismissive. He was speechless. Every pair of eyes in the room turned toward Vivian. The sympathy she had collected so carefully all week evaporated in seconds, replaced by a mixture of disbelief and disgust. Marcus closed his laptop slowly. "This will proceed legally, but I wanted the truth to be heard by the same mouths that carried her lies." No one clapped. No one whispered. They only stared. It was the second climax of my story, the public exposure moment, the one that finally broke the spell Vivian had held over my life for decades. That night when we left the hall, the cold Iowa air felt different. Sharp, clean, honest. For the first time in years, it felt like mine. The legal aftermath began moving within days of the town meeting, as if the public exposure had snapped every remaining delay loose and forced the system to move with clarity it previously lacked. The county attorney reviewed the police investigation, the medical records, the footprint analysis, the video footage, and the documented harassment, and by the end of the week, formal charges were filed against Vivian. The primary charge was assault on a pregnant woman, which in Iowa is considered a serious aggravated offense due to the risk posed to both mother and unborn child. When I received the call confirming the charge, I felt a complicated mixture of relief and grief because even though I had wanted accountability, a part of me had never imagined the woman who had lived in my childhood home would one day face a courtroom for what she had done. But justice does not bend for comfort, and for once, the truth was stronger than fear. During the preliminary hearings, Vivian tried to present herself as a trembling bystander swept into chaos she did not cause, but the prosecutor was unshaken. He walked through every piece of evidence methodically, the partial video footage showing her confrontational posture, the medical report outlining the impact trauma, the footprint match showing the exact tread of her boots, the dozens of messages she had sent me filled with hostility and accusations that revealed clear motive. With every page he read aloud, her confidence cracked further. My father attended the hearings, sitting in the back row with a rigid posture and an expression carved from embarrassment rather than remorse. At one point, the judge addressed his involvement, directly noting that his initial attempts to mischaracterize the incident and his willingness to dismiss the severity of the assault bordered on obstruction. He received an official warning recorded in the court file, reminding him that enabling or covering for an assault victim's abuser, even passively, had legal consequences. He did not argue. He only nodded and stared at the floor, as if the weight of the moment had finally settled onto his shoulders. When it came time for Vivian's sentencing, the courtroom was quiet, holding the thick tension of something final. Vivian stood before the judge in a plain gray suit, her shoulders small, her face strained with disbelief rather than remorse. She insisted one last time that she had never intended harm, that everything had been misunderstood, that I had always been emotional and dramatic. But the judge had seen enough posturing in his career to recognize manipulation when he heard it. He read from the bench with a steady voice. He noted the seriousness of attacking a pregnant woman. He referenced the evidence. He referenced the public danger of continued harassment. He referenced the complete lack of accountability in her statements. And then he delivered the sentence. 1 year of suspended jail time, 200 hours of mandatory community service, court-ordered counseling focused on anger management and coercive behavior, and a 5-year protective order requiring her to remain physically and digitally distant from me and once born from my child. Vivian's mouth parted in shock, her face draining of color as if she had never truly believed consequences would reach her. My father let out a soft, strangled sound behind me, not loud enough to draw attention, but loud enough for me to hear the collapse of his denial. I did not look back at either of them. I kept my eyes on the judge's final words, absorbing each one like a boundary being rebuilt around a life that had once been left unprotected. When the hearing ended, Vivian was escorted out of the courtroom by deputies, her steps uneven, her expression unfocused. She did not look at me. She did not apologize. She did not acknowledge the child she had endangered. I watched her leave without shaking, without questioning myself, without the familiar ache of needing validation from the people who had long refused to give it. Outside the courthouse, the winter air felt crisp against my skin. Marcus stood waiting near the steps, hands in the pockets of his uniform coat, his presence grounded and steady. When I approached, he looked at me for a long moment, not with pity, but with recognition, as if he understood that something had shifted inside me permanently. Not just legally, emotionally. After years of gaslighting control and chaos, I had finally seen the system affirm the truth I had been forced to defend alone for so long. I exhaled slowly, the breath frosting in the cold air. The case was closed. The sentence was real. The boundaries were enforced. and for the first time, accountability existed where denial had once thrived. The consequences were not dramatic or cinematic. They were measured, firm, quiet, but they were enough. They were what justice looks like in real life: steady, deliberate, and irreversible. That evening, as Marcus drove us back toward Des Moines, I rested my hand on my stomach and felt the faintest flutter beneath my palm. A reminder of why I had survived all of it. A reminder of what mattered most. A reminder that the future no longer belonged to the people who had tried to break me, but to the child growing inside me, and the life I was finally building on my own terms. 3 months passed after the sentencing, and in that time, everything in my life shifted into a quieter, more predictable rhythm. My belly had grown noticeably, my steps had slowed, and the flutters inside me had become stronger and more frequent. Jenna kept a gentle watch over me, and Marcus flew in and out whenever his schedule allowed, always arriving with a steady presence that grounded the restlessness I sometimes felt. The court order had done exactly what it was meant to do. Vivian disappeared from my daily life. No more messages, no more calls, no more rumors drifting through the town. It was as if the protective boundary drawn by the judge had finally forced her to retreat into the silence she should have chosen from the beginning. And then, one quiet morning in early spring, my phone buzzed with a number I did not recognize. I almost ignored it until I noticed the message preview. The words froze my breath. "I'm ready to apologize. Can we talk before the baby is born?" Even without a name attached, I knew that voice instantly. The phrasing, the selective softness, the attempt to sound composed and remorseful without ever acknowledging the extent of the harm she had caused. Vivian had resurfaced. 3 months after claiming her innocence in court. 3 months after insisting she had done nothing wrong. 3 months after nearly ending the life growing inside me. My first reaction wasn't fear. It was an odd, icy calm, a steadiness I had not possessed in earlier parts of my life. I read the message once, then again, and each time something inside me settled more firmly into place. There was no apology in her words, no responsibility, no acknowledgement of violence, only the familiar implication that I owed her something that she had earned through neither love nor accountability. I typed my response slowly, making sure each letter reflected the truth I now lived by. No. Not today. Not ever. I hit send without hesitation. It should have ended there, but Vivian had never accepted boundaries easily. Within minutes, another message arrived, this time dripping with theatrical concern. "You're being unfair. I deserve to be part of my grandchild's life. Families fix things." My jaw tightened. The audacity would have stunned me years earlier, but now it only confirmed what the judge had already witnessed. Vivian wanted access control proximity, not reconciliation. Another message followed. "I have a right to see my grandchild. Ignoring me makes you look bitter." There it was, the old manipulation reappearing like a familiar storm pattern. When that did not get a response, she tried a different tactic. "I'm trying to do the right thing. You should at least meet me halfway." Halfway! The word felt almost absurd. Vivian had almost cost my child their life. She had smeared me publicly. She had lied to police officers, to neighbors, to my father. She had stormed into my workplace and tried to strip away everything I had built. She had walked away from me on a concrete floor while I bled and struggled to breathe. Halfway was not an option. I placed my hand on my stomach, feeling a soft movement beneath my palm, and I typed one final message. "You will not meet my child. Not now. Not ever. Do not contact me again." When I sent it, I didn't feel guilt. I didn't feel fear. I felt a clean, quiet certainty that surprised me with its strength. For the first time in my life, I had shut the door on her completely, without flinching, without second-guessing, without the old ache of wanting her to be different. After that final exchange, she tried calling twice, but the court order gave me the clarity to block the number immediately and document the attempted contact. I sent the screenshots to the detective handling the case. He wrote back with a short message acknowledging receipt, promising to update the file. And just like that, Vivian slipped back into silence. Not because she understood her wrongdoing, but because the law had finally given weight to the word no, something she had never respected when it came from me. As the afternoon sunlight warmed the living room, I felt the baby kick lightly and realized that I no longer carried the dread of her return. She might try again someday, but it would not matter. The boundaries were permanent, and I was no longer a child she could reach. 7 months after the night in the garage on a quiet December morning, when the world outside felt wrapped in a blanket of winter calm, my labor began. It started softly, a tightening across my abdomen that made me pause mid-step in Jenna's kitchen, one hand bracing the counter, while the other instinctively protected the life inside me. I had prepared for this moment through classes, doctor visits, late-night reading sessions, but nothing truly prepares you for the realization that you are hours away from meeting a person who has been a heartbeat beneath your own. Marcus was already in Iowa, having arranged his leave weeks in advance. When I called him, he arrived in minutes, calm, focused grounding. He helped me into the car, whispered steady reassurances, and held my hand through every mile between Jenna's home and the hospital in Des Moines. The nurses admitted me quickly, their movements smooth with practiced precision, and soon I was surrounded by the soft beeping of monitors, the cool scent of antiseptic, and the low murmur of medical voices guiding me through each step. Labor blurred the world into a series of waves, intense, consuming, demanding my full presence. Marcus stood beside me the entire time. He did not hover or panic. He did what he always did. He steadied the atmosphere, anchoring me with his quiet strength, reminding me with each gentle squeeze of my hand that I was not alone. Hours passed in a rhythm of breathing and pushing, and moments of brief rest that felt both endless and fleeting. Then, in one final surge of effort, the room filled with a sound I had dreamt of but never fully imagined, the small, powerful cry of my child entering the world. My breath caught. Tears blurred my vision. A nurse announced the time. Another wrapped the baby in a soft blanket. And then they placed the tiny warm weight onto my chest. Everything fell silent inside me. All the years of chaos, fear, confusion, and hurt faded into a soft, distant hum. I looked into the small face nestled against my skin, felt the warmth, the delicate breaths, the fragile strength, and something inside me shifted forever. My baby, my child, my future. Marcus leaned close, resting his forehead gently against mine. His eyes filled with awe that replaced the stern composure he wore in uniform. For a moment, we said nothing. Words would have fallen short of the gravity of what we were witnessing. When the nurses stepped out to give us privacy, I felt a serene quiet settle across the room, broken only by the soft ticking of the wall clock and the steady breathing of the tiny life cradled against me. After a while, a nurse returned and asked if I wanted to try standing or moving to the chair near the window. I nodded. With Marcus's help, I slowly stood cradling my newborn carefully, and we walked to the wide hospital window overlooking Des Moines. Outside, snow had begun to fall in delicate, slow flakes that drifted past the glass like tiny, bright sparks. The sky was a soft silver gray, the city below muted and calm under the early winter snowfall. It looked almost unreal, as if the world had orchestrated this moment intentionally. I sat in the cushioned chair, adjusting the blanket around my child, and gazed out through the glass as the snow continued its gentle descent. Something about that view felt symbolic, as if the world outside was mirroring the transformation happening inside me. A cleansing, a reset, a new beginning. Marcus placed a hand on my shoulder and stayed quietly beside me, giving me space while still being part of the moment. I watched the snow gather on the ledges and rooftops, watched each flake melt slightly against the warm glass before disappearing, and I felt the weight of years, long years filled with fear and manipulation and survival, finally begin to lift. For the first time in as long as I could remember, my mind was not racing toward danger, or preparing for the next blow, or anticipating the next wound. For the first time, I was not bracing myself. I was not shrinking. I was not waiting to be hurt. I was simply existing in a moment that belonged entirely to me and the child sleeping softly against my chest. A deep, quiet peace settled into my bones, filling spaces that had been empty for so long I barely remembered what they were supposed to hold. Every breath felt lighter, every heartbeat steadier. I looked at my baby, traced the tiny fingers curled around my thumb, and felt something warm rise in my chest. something I had long thought impossible: safety, hope, freedom. The snow outside thickened slightly, swirling in slow circles under the winter sky, and the reflection of the room shimmered faintly on the window. I could see myself holding my child, framed by soft light and falling snow, and for the first time in decades, the image did not feel foreign. It felt right. It felt earned. It felt like healing. I closed my eyes briefly, let a quiet exhale leave my body, and whispered the words that had been gathering at the edge of my awareness since the moment I heard my child's first cry. I am finally free. In the weeks after bringing my baby home, as I adjusted to midnight feedings, soft newborn breaths, and the quiet rhythm of our new life, I found myself reflecting often on the long road that had led me here. The bruises had faded, the court case had closed, the town gossip had gone silent. Vivian had retreated into the distance where she could no longer reach me. My father had disappeared from my life, entirely choosing denial over accountability. And yet, instead of mourning what was lost, I found myself grateful for the clarity that had come from the darkness. It taught me who I was. It taught me who I could be. And it taught me painfully but thoroughly what family really means. When I finally sat down to record this story for the people who follow my channel, I kept thinking about the viewers who watch from their living rooms and kitchens every evening, folks in their 50s, 60s, 70s, people who carry lifetimes of memories, scars, secrets, and quiet battles. People who recognize toxic patterns the moment they see them. People who know what it means to survive hurt delivered by the very people who were supposed to protect them. So, if you're listening, this part is for you. I want to tell you something I learned the hard way. Something I know many of you already understand deep in your bones. No amount of blood makes someone family. Loyalty does. I grew up believing that if I tried harder, behaved better, stayed quieter, endured longer, I could earn respect or love or basic safety. I thought survival required shrinking myself so others could stay comfortable. I thought loyalty meant forgiveness at any cost. I was wrong. What saved my life was not obedience. It was boundaries. What protected my child was not compliance. It was truth. And what gave me peace was not reconciliation. It was walking away. There are people in this world who will call themselves family while tearing you apart piece by piece. They will demand access to your life, your emotions, your energy, even your children, while giving you nothing but pain in return. They will use guilt, fear, obligation, and history to keep you tethered to them. But history is not love. Blood is not morality, and proximity is not loyalty. If someone consistently harms you, dismisses you, or endangers the people you love, you are allowed to leave. You are allowed to choose peace over chaos. You are allowed to choose safety over tradition. You are allowed to protect your future, even if it means letting go of your past. And if no one has ever told you that plainly before, let me be the one to say it to you now. You deserve a life without fear. You deserve a family built on trust, not control. You deserve loyalty, not manipulation. If you've made it this far into my story, I want to ask you for something small but meaningful. Not for me. For the people who come to this channel looking for strength, looking for proof they're not alone, looking for someone else's story to shine a light on their own. So here's my gentle call to action. If you've ever escaped a toxic family, share your story in the comments. You might help someone today. You might remind someone that leaving is possible. You might remind someone that they are not crazy, not overreacting, not alone. Your story matters more than you think. As I hold my child and look toward the future ahead of us, I want to leave you with one final thought, something I now understand in a way I never could have when I was younger. Justice is not loud. It's steady. And it always comes. Sometimes justice looks like a courtroom. Sometimes it looks like a protective order. Sometimes it looks like standing in the snow outside a hospital window with a newborn in your arms, finally breathing freely for the first time in years. And sometimes justice is simply the quiet realization that you survived something meant to break you and built a better life anyway. Wherever you are watching from tonight, whether it's a small town like mine or a big city far away, I hope you carry this truth with you. Your peace is worth protecting. Your safety is worth fighting for. Your future is worth choosing. Thank you for listening to my story. And if no one has told you this lately, let me say it now with all the steadiness I've earned. You deserve better than the pain you escaped.